What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king. E3 is finally upon us. Well, it's actually kind of already come and sort of gone. I mean, we're still in the middle of it, but the conferences are over, and now we're just getting all of the gameplay goodness and trailers goodness and whatnot that comes after the conferences for the next couple days. But in the following 6 videos, I'm going to be going over each and every one of the major conferences, or at least for the first five videos, I'll be going over each conference, and then for the 6th one, I'll be kind of doing all the odds and ends, i.e. PC Gamer, Nintendo, and then everything else that wasn't talked about in the major conferences that's been revealed thus far. And if there's, anything else of note, I'll probably talk about it later. But as of right now, I just kind of want to give my impressions on each and every conference and go over what I thought were the highlights and also what each conference didn't do so well, because in all honesty, this was a pretty good E3 conference-wise. I think it was, I mean, not to be biased, but I think one conference definitely handled their portion the best. Doesn't mean they necessarily had the best content, but the way that the conference was structured was best. And then there were 2 other extremely solid conferences, and then 2 conferences I think that fell a little short. But we're going to tackle them all in order, and we're going to start off with Electronic Arts. EA is a conference that I went into with very low expectations, just because I always have low expectations for EA, because I think they are a scummy publisher and I don't like them. But that aside, they do still have some good games under their belt even to this day. So let's start off with the first of the things they talked about, which was Titanfall 2. Now, this is actually a game I was excited for. I never really got to play Titanfall 1, nor can really anybody at this point, because nobody's on the servers anymore. But Titanfall 2 seems like it's a good response to all of the criticisms everybody had of the first game. Because as far as I know, Titanfall 1 was good, it just didn't have any staying power. And, being multiplayer only, it's hard to retain that staying power. This time, they did show off the multiplayer, of course, again, because it is still a focus. However, there's also going to be a single-player campaign. And in this single-player campaign, from the sounds of it, the mechs that that your character pilots in this game is actually alive, or at least in a sense, with the operative to protect the pilot, which is the character. And the single-player campaign is going to focus on the relationship between the pilot and the mech, or Titan, I guess, which is interesting. I do want to get into the Titanfall lore. And also, I do want to check out the environments in Titanfall, because they're very Halo-esque, which is eye-catching to me. I like the big jungle/foresty planets that these kinds of games take place on, and I'm always willing to see more of that, or happy to see more of that, rather. And I really did want a single-player campaign out of the first Titanfall, which is unfortunately why the game wasn't so enticing. But Titanfall 2 does look very interesting, and this is not going to be Xbox and PC exclusive anymore. It will also be on PlayStation 4 this time, which makes me very happy as somebody who prefers to play on PlayStation, just because of, I have more friends on the system, as well as preferring the actual DualShock over the Xbox One controller. And that comes out on October 28th, which is great. That's very soon, and I like that. I'm very excited. I don't know if I'll be picking it up day 1, but I probably won't wait too long after release. Then EA went into the first of their few mandatory segments that they have to go through every year, but this one was actually not too bad. They started off, they had to go into Madden, of course, because that's their yearly juggernaut. And for anyone that complains about it, reminder that Madden is yearly one of the top 3 selling video games almost every single year. Usually the only times Madden and, I guess Madden alone and Call of Duty aren't the top 2 is if a Grand Theft Auto came out that year. That's typically the only time they don't take the top 2 spots. So Madden's a huge deal. And me, as I do like Madden games. I don't buy them annually. I buy them probably once every 2 or 3 games. Because I do like the games. I do really enjoy playing sports games. But, it's not like something I need to know every single time, because for the most part, yes, really the only changes between games are roster updates. There's a couple occasional tweaks, because not every game is perfect. I could probably name at least 1 or 2 bugs that each individual Madden game I own has, that never really got fixed. But that aside, it is an important series, and it's definitely more for, the shareholders and the media themselves rather than the players that are actually participating in E3, because Madden obviously focuses towards a more casual player base rather than the hardcore player base who is going to make up most of who's tuning into E3. They also tried to push esports with Madden, which makes sense because esports, I mean, that just seems like a natural thing. I'm honestly surprised there's not a bigger esports community for sports games. I did know for the longest time that there actually has been a sort of Madden competitive community. I mean, I even know that ESPN did a feature on it for quite a few years back, actually, and I watched it a couple times. It was just called the Madden Bowl. And actually some of the faces that I saw up on stage in this conference when they were talking about it, I recognized from when I watched that show, several years back. And I mean, I didn't watch it regularly. I watched it every once in a while, but it just surprises me that this isn't, a more heavily pushed part of the industry, in my opinion. It just makes sense, I guess, because it just seems so natural. Sports, esports. I mean, and it seems like it could have a much more casual appeal to over something like Counter-Strike or League of Legends or Dota. But after that came Mass Effect Andromeda, which, of course, is a huge deal. This was, I think, one of the better things of the EA conference. Actually, it didn't show any gameplay specifically, which is never really a good thing. But I also think the game is too early along to show any of that. However, it was enough to get someone like me, who is in no way interested in the first 3 Mass Effect games, and in fact didn't like what he played of it, interested once again. I actually am very intrigued in Mass Effect Andromeda, and if this starts a whole new series of events, unrelated, I mean, in the same universe, obviously, as the first 3 Mass Effects, but, a new protagonist and whatnot, I think I might be jumping on board to this one. It looked very intriguing. And, BioWare, they usually do some pretty good stuff. They can be a little bit overrated at times. I feel like, while their games are great, they're not polished to such extraordinary levels that some people claim they are. But that being said, Mass Effect is a juggernaut of a series, and I think this whole new concept of, humanity moving to this new planet and whatnot, and then them trying to make a living there, is a very interesting concept, and I can't wait to see where they take that, actually. So I am going to be following this game very closely. They also talked about EA Access and how there was going to be a free trial for all Xbox One and PC owners for a extended period of time for the next couple weeks, and then they jumped into this EA Play to Give charitable program thing. And what it was is it's a cool idea, actually. I was I liked this idea from EA. They decided to do this thing over the next, I think it's over the next year. It might actually just be longer than that. I don't know. Where they put these in-game challenges in all of their notable IPs, such as Battlefield 4 and Hardline, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, Battlefront, FIFA, Madden, etc. These little challenges you're supposed to do, and every single time you complete one of those challenges, a donation is made to one of the charities they listed. I don't have the full list of charities listed, but there were actually a lot of them related to that were pro-women charities and whatnot, and I thought that was a very good idea. I mean, it's just a little thing they have on the side, another thing that encourages you to do certain things in a game and whatnot. And you know what? I'm all for it, 100%. I have no problems with that whatsoever. Then they got into FIFA, which is actually a sports game I have zero connection to. I never have been interested in the FIFA games, but I know that FIFA is also a huge seller, right up there with Madden. If Madden's not top 3, then FIFA is every year. It's huge. A lot of people love the FIFA games. And they talked about this new mode called the Journey or whatever with Alex Hunter, who, I'm sorry, I don't even know what that name is or who that is or who the guy on stage was. If he's, big deal, I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't follow soccer, but you're supposed to, follow his story and whatnot, and it's going to be this really cool, journey thing, but it's only on the PS4 and Xbox One versions of FIFA 17. And that's supposed to be like the drawing point for this big single player mode, which is, it's interesting. I actually, when I play like the Madden games or the NBA 2K games that I play, my favorite modes have always been the ones where you take on the role of a singular player. they've always just intrigued me a lot, and I know I'm not the only one who feels that way, so I'm sure that will draw a lot of people in. Then they moved on to EA Originals, which was interesting to me, but only because I thought they'd already basically announced this last year with Unravel when they revealed that game. But it turns out that was actually just the inspiration for this because Unravel did so freaking well. Instead, this time, they unveiled a game called Fee. I think it was Fee, maybe it was Fae. Maybe it was just the periodic table symbol for iron. It doesn't matter. It's a game by a company called Zoink Games. I believe they were Swedish or something like that. And this game was very, very indie for starters. It was a little bit polygonal in its design. A lot of people compared it to Ori and the Blind Forest, and aesthetically, I would agree with that. Although I wouldn't say mechanically it does. There was no real clear direction of the game as far as what we saw in the trailer, but it looks like another charming, cute, explorative indie game. And you know what? The more of those, the better. I'm always happy to see another one of those games, and I know I'm going to be following this game closely as well. Then they moved on to Star Wars after that. They talked about how there's actually multiple Star Wars games in production and whatnot, including the second Battlefront, and then also games being made by Visceral and Respawn, which I thought was very interesting, especially because, Respawn, they're in charge of Titanfall at the moment, and then Visceral is actually the Dead Space creators. And Visceral almost can do no wrong with their track record. In fact, almost all the problems Visceral's had with their games, I almost chalk it more to EA's publishing strategy rather than Visceral's development strategy. Visceral's a fantastic company, so that right there makes me more excited. I actually have infinitely more respect for Visceral and Respawn than I ever do for DICE. So that alone has me extremely excited for what's to come. But, I mean, hopefully, they also said Battlefront 2 is going to be a much more complete game this time when it comes out. Don't know if that's always going to be true because, leave it to EA to gut their game for DLC and whatnot. But, that aside. Also, what was also extremely interesting was Amy Hennig, who wrote the first 3 Uncharted games, is behind Visceral's Star Wars game, which makes it even more exciting because Amy Hennig is awesome, and Uncharted 1 through 3 were awesome. And I'm now extremely excited. They showed a little bit of in-game footage, and it looks like you play as some Han Solo-esque, rogue character. And if you played like an Uncharted-esque adventure in like the Star Wars universe, oh my gosh, take my money now. That would be so cool. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. Such an interesting idea to me. And then, last but of course not least, EA held out, for the very end, they held out Battlefield 1, which, leading into this conference, obviously the excitement for that was extremely high. It's a fresh idea in an industry oversaturated with modern military shooters. We're finally getting a World War I shooter, which in and of itself is extremely crazy because even back in the day when World War II was all the rage, you never saw World War I because as much as people will say, oh, they're kind of similar, they're really not. They're actually extremely different environments, very different combat, and I think it lends to some very creative scenarios. Now, again, Battlefield 1 is DICE, which does worry me because who knows how much the game's going to get gutted, who knows how much the game is going to, almost meet that potential but never quite do it. But at the same time, this is also still the same DICE that made Battlefield Bad Company 1 and 2, which they made really good on accident. So if they make Battlefield 1 really good on accident, I won't complain. I really won't complain. And I really do hope that it does do well, just because I want it to pave the way for more. That's my biggest hope for Battlefield 1, is that it sets the bar, and now all these other developers come out of the woodworks to meet that and exceed it. That's what I want. All in all, EA's conference was okay. The games that they showed were good, and I will admit I was probably a little bit more optimistic about each and every single one of these than I was when I initially saw the conference. Especially the sports parts. Trust me, I was right there groaning along with everyone else. during those sections. But at the same time, you know, I understand why it's there. Games like Titanfall 2 have my interest. Fee definitely has my interest. Mass Effect Andromeda has my interest. I mean, Battlefield 1 does a little, and the Star Wars stuff has me very skeptical because I'm always scared of EA handling the Star Wars IPs and whatnot and the license. But at the same time, as far as EA conferences are concerned, I would say this is one of the better ones they've ever had, if not one of the best. EA has a very big tendency to come and throw all this day one DLC stuff at you and all of this, all of this corporate industry bullcrap that we're all so sick of seeing. And they did none of that this time. And I think that was big. That was big on EA. And that alone, I think, really prevented them from having the worst conference this E3. Because, I mean, they were surprisingly competent this time. That's what I'll give EA. I'll say about EA. If I had to grade it, which is completely arbitrary, and I guess I'll do that for all the conferences, I would give EA a solid B-. That's what I would say. There was nothing that was, whoa, that really stood out to me. If anything, I would say Mass Effect Andromeda was the closest, just because I had the lowest expectations for that. And they were exceeded. But I don't really think anything blew my mind at EA, which is less than I can say for almost all of the other conferences. But next up, we're going to get into the Bethesda conference, which I think was actually a lot better than the EA conference, so that is something to look forward to, and I will see you all in the next one.